I unplugged this on accident. I was going to chairs where they needed to be.
That's okay.
Oh, 911 got there. Yeah, he was, his son started CPR's PhD, doctor in physical therapy. And they
I got a hard drive.
It is, what is today's date? July 9th?
July 9th.
Yes.
Yes, well, welcome. We've got a work session going here, and Dan, I think you're first up. Dave, did you want to introduce our colleagues who are here?
Sure, it's
I know
my
them quite
pleasure.
well.
It's my pleasure to introduce the RAFTA staff and their supporting.
Oh, Dave, the mic.
It's my pleasure to introduce the RAFTA staff and their consultant, Ralph Trapani. He's been here a couple of times before presenting their Destination 2040 plan. I believe Dan Blankenship is the Chief Executive Officer of RAFTA. David Johnson is their Senior Planner, who's done a lot of work on and putting some of these long-range visions together with the help of the Parsons Group. So I believe Dan or Ralph, would you like to?
Well, we'll arm wrestle, but I'll start.
Okay, there you go.
Well, thank you, David, and it's great to be here today. This is a very similar presentation to what some of you might have seen at the EOTC, and my apologies for that. What I'm going to do today is quickly go through the funding history of RAFTA, talk about what a no mill levy alternative would look like, go through the project list, financial capacity, talk about some of the results of the May 2018 board retreat, quick couple of slides on the polling results, and then we'll have some time for discussion. We're here today to hear from the board mainly, and I'll try to go through things quickly because this board has seen a lot of this already. Here's the kind of flow chart. I don't know, there's my cursor, and we're out here in 2018 looking at developing the financial plan. We've been through 3 stages, and we started work in March of 2016. So quickly, a history of RAFTA. The need for a mill levy is really based on a lot of history. Back in 2000, RAFTA was approved by the voters and formed. The member jurisdictions came in at varying rates of sales tax. In 2004, there was a 2/10 sales tax increase region-wide, and Newcastle joined RAFTA back in 2004. In 2008, the BRT came through with a 0.4% sales tax. Again, that was region-wide. And in 2008, it was stated by RAFTA that that was intended to keep RAFTA financially fit for about 12 years, to take us out to about 2020, and that's why we're here today, to talk about beyond 2020. So we've identified what a no mill levy scenario would look like if RAFTA kept plugging away with the tax base they've got now. It'll start by 2027, there'll immediately be a deficit and a negative fund balance. And to respond to that, RAFTA would need to reduce their service to get back into a positive fund balance. It would also give RAFTA little or no ability to leverage additional funds. There'd be no matching money to speak of because there'd be no cash balance. The service cuts would be, in my opinion, dramatic in the 20 to 25% range. That would really be a big hit since RAFTA's taking between 10 and 11,000 cars a day off of the Highway 82 system now, depending on where you look. The highlighted, this is a ride, basically a RAFTA schedule. The highlighted routes that would be eliminated. What's especially of concern in a no mill levy scenario is losing those late in the night routes, which I think are important for public safety. Similar situation for winter as you'd have for summer. Again, this is what a 25% service reduction would look like. So that's not a good idea, but we do present that because we have been getting questions about, well, what would happen if there was no mill levy increase? And it doesn't paint a very happy picture. So let's talk about the project list, something you folks have heard a lot about. We did 3 categories: improvements for the environment, improvements for reducing congestion, improving mobility, and improvements for sustainability and safety. Those are the 3 big buckets of projects we talked about. The costs have all been updated and checked, and we now have actually renumbered, and this is, I think some of you have seen this at the EOTC and at the board retreat, but now we renumber the projects to coincide with this great map that's on the brochure that was put together. And there it is. You can see in blue are the improvements for reducing congestion, improving mobility, the service increases, and so on. In green is the environmental improvements, the bus replacement going to the electric buses, for example, some of the bike trail connections. And then, of course, in black up in the other corner are the improvements for sustainability and safety, the various ped crossings, some of the facility expansions, additional transit stations. And I always want to, when I come to see the good folks here in Snowmass, is again talk about the improvements to the town of Snowmass, to the Snowmass Transit Center, and also, if I can find it here, the better service connections to Snowmass Village on Brush Creek Road. Those are important to the community, and they're included in this list. So we did a financial capacity analysis to look at this list. It's not a model. It really was a little rougher analysis to look at project delivery, affordability. It's higher level in scope, and we use those results to take to RAFTA's planning and financial consultant to look at the full level feasibility. So we did 4 scenarios, and this was for the board retreat: a status quo scenario with battery electric buses, and I'll go through these in a little detail in a minute. A sustainable growth scenario, Destination 2040 stakeholder recommendations, which is basically all the projects that came as a result of the outreach that have been done for the last couple of years, and then an all-in regional RAFTA membership projects, and I'll get into the details of those. So we did determine the project list for each scenario, and we ran a mill levy amount to identify cash flow, bonding, so on for each scenario. Now again, this is the capacity analysis. And what we get is, these are just the service plan components of the capacity of this analysis. With the battery electric buses at 2 mil, You get bus replacement, and that's about it. You don't get any of these service improvements. But all of the other scenarios, the sustainable growth of 355, the stakeholder recommendation, and the all-in at 4.3, do include the service improvements. And these are robust improvements. This is a 30-minute increase in Valley service, increases on the weekend BRT, the Grand Hogback service going 30-minute headways from Newcastle, the member community, into Glenwood, expanding service in Glenwood again, including some additional routes, both the local and the BRT, and of course the service up to Snowmass. And this is how the rest of the projects line up. We've got a handout for this. I think you might have seen it at the EOTC. But again, you can see at the status quo kind of, you can get the battery electric buses and some maintenance facility improvements, but that's about all you can get at 2 mil. And then as you move up, you can see at 3.55 mil, you can pick up a fair amount of projects. At 3.65, you basically pick up the entire project list except for the circulators and some projects on the Rio Grande Trail. And at 4.3 mils, which is all in, you get to basically everything, which includes the expanded circulators in some of the other communities. We are doing some more work in preparation for the board meeting on Thursday. Dan, you might want to talk a little bit about that so there's not a surprise.
Well, in the board agenda packet, which was sent out on Friday evening, there is some information about an additional scenario that is at 2.65 mils. And in order to be able to still fund a significant number of the capital improvements and the operating service improvements, we had to make some assumptions about how we could kind of shrink the cost of the overall, that overall scenario. So we assume that the state sales tax could pass, and if it does, we're on a list that would provide 50% of the funding that's needed for the Glenwood maintenance facility. Whereas we were just assuming 10% of the funding in these scenarios that were shown here. Now we're assuming 50%. Because people have asked, well, what are the implications of that sales tax passing? And that would be one of the implications, is that we would be on a list of projects that would get 50% of the funding, so it would be about $15 million. The other thing that we did was we went down the list and we removed some of the capital projects from the list. And you know, CDOT has its State Transportation Implementation Plan. They have a constrained list that matches the funding they project will be available, and an unconstrained list. So we moved projects from the constrained list to the unconstrained list, and in some cases we reduced the cost of projects. For example, office space and employee housing, which was in there for about $20 million, we cut that in half. We also assumed that we would spend, let's see, trying to think. We had the, for the existing services, Ralph showed you pie charts that are the level of services that we would have to reduce in order to be able to bring things into balance. But we believe that we might be able to wring maybe 5% efficiency out of our existing regional services by cutting back some of the midday BRT buses and so forth that are not at capacity right now. And there may be some local bus service that we could also try to tailor a little bit more, so that that would help in the out years, especially as these costs increase at 3 or 4% per year, making the new services a higher priority. So the funding that we're saving by those service reductions would, accrue to the benefit of those new services and help to offset some of those costs. So through a combination of moving projects from the constrained list to an unconstrained list that we might be able to fund if we get more grants or there's more state money available, and by cutting back the cost of some of the capital projects, and through assuming that we're going to get more funding for the Glenwood maintenance facility, we were able to get down to about 2.65 mil levy. We're not sure that the state sales tax will pass, and while we put this into our model that was developed by PFM, it does cash flow positively for until 2049. The concern is that how much funding we have in order to maintain our coverage ratio for debt, which we're shooting for 1.5 coverage ratio. There are some places where it dips down, and in those out years it starts to go down below that. So it means that we might have more difficulty obtaining financing for bus replacements or doing bonds in the future if our that ratio gets below that 1.5. So I think what we would want people to understand is that if we were able to go to the polls with a 2.65 or whatever the board decides would be acceptable, that it's not necessarily a tax increase for all time. We might need to come back in 10 years or somewhere down in that 2030 to 2040 timeframe to make sure that we have sufficient revenue to replace buses in those out years, because we have quite a few buses in the fleet, and they're not getting any less expensive. One of the other things we did was we cut back the number of expansion buses, I think, from 16 to 10. And so by combination of just whittling it here and there, we were able to bring down the scale and scope of the overall capital project.
So the 16 to 10, what kind of buses are those? Are those CNG or the old diesel?
I think those were expected to be CNGs.
Okay, okay.
Well, there'll be a detailed presentation at the RAFTA board meeting on Thursday, and there is some information in the packet that went out Friday night, so.
But we had received some, after the retreat, and then our board meeting last month, and we started hearing from some members of the board, and then Bill Ray, who's working on our team, was meeting with some of the board members individually and trying to get a pulse from them in terms of
Met with Bill. So
their level of support for 3.65, which was pretty strong at the retreat, but I think people have been hearing from folks, and there are other potential taxing measures that are going to be on the ballot. So the concern is that if we go forward with something that has a better chance to be successful.
are you going to talk about the polling results, just to
Yes,
refresh
we are.
our memory? So, to my colleagues, in looking at the polling results, Bill, the pollster, did loop back and talk with all of us, and then I'll disclose, I've also met with George Newman as well, so, who's chair of the RAFTA board. But,
Go ahead.
and I want to hear from my colleagues about where you think a reasonable threshold is.
Well, let's finish this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I've just got a few more slides. We'll get through this. Just a quick summary from the board retreat, and these are the 3.65 mil numbers, and this is at an assessment rate of 7.2, which I need to tell you that's important because we understand the assessment rate is going down in 2019, so some of the revenue forecasts we worked on are actually going to be less. But you can see at 3.65, for $500,000 actual home value, it's about a little tick under $11 a month, a little over $131 a year. So if you had $1 million home, you could just double those amounts and see what your tax burden would be. Commercial, of course, has got a lot higher assessment rate. They'd be looking at, for $1 million property, about $88 a month, or about a little $1,058 a year. And I don't expect that assessment rate to change with Gallagher, is my understanding, Dan.
For commercial properties, it's not going to change, but for residential, it's currently, I think, at 7.2, and next year, it's going to go down to 6.11.
And then guess what happens after that?
Well, it can't go any further down than zero, they tell me, but
It sure can go up.
But, we've heard rumors that the legislature recognizes that this is a huge problem, particularly for rural areas, and that it's planning in, I think, the 2020 timeframe to try to address Gallagher in some way that will stop the bleeding for
Agreed.
local governments in the rural areas.
Agreed.
And this is the overall view of what 3.65 looks like. And again, we can do the math for you. About 80% of the value of this property tax increase will be covered by the Upper Valley communities. So talk about the polling results. It was done kind of right after the Memorial Day weekend. To recheck public support and messaging, it was about 20 questions. We had about 305 responses. We had targeted 400, but it was kind of tough to get people to answer their phones then, so we took it down to 305. Lots of words on this, but let me hit the high points. The second poll found very little movement in attitude since the January poll. The voters are positive about the RAFTA services. Again, less than half of the voters say that they're familiar with the proposal, and less than 20% are very familiar. And I'm not sure how those 20% could be very familiar, because there really, other than these types of meetings, hasn't been a lot of information put out. Through this poll, voters were pretty evenly divided, 44%, 43 no. But one of the things that was interesting about this poll was when the pollster asked the question about the actual wording in the ballot initiative, the big numbers were in it, the numbers that said 200 million total, 100 million for bonding. And the fact that those big numbers didn't move the needle very much was a positive message that came back based on our pollsters. Of course, the strongest supporters are younger, male, RAFTA, Democratic Party in Pickens County. The detractors are older women, RAFTA, non-RAFTA, Republican non-RAFTA members in Down Valley. So after the messaging, we asked the same question again. We go through 15 questions about mobility. And with the second question, we moved the needle up to 51%, again with still 40% opposed. Let me bounce down to the 9% of the voters who said they were no or unsure on the first ballot. They would say yes. 9% of the voters who said no or unsure would say yes to a lower rate. So I think that that's some of the things that Mayor Butler's responding to and others up here. The top messages remain electrification of the buses, more transit options, the multi-use trails, and keeping the fares down for seniors. And here's just a few snapshots again. Back in January, you could see RAFTA got a 79% A or B grade. We lost about 5% in June, but that's the afterglow of the Grand Avenue Bridge detour, I suspect. That's still a very high number. People are really pleased with the way RAFTA operates. And here's the yes and no. Here's the first ask. The initial ask was at 44-43, and then at the end, after there had been the voters, the people had taken the poll were informed, it jumped up to 51-40. So there is some value in messaging. We've learned that. So what are our next steps? Based on this poll, we've been directed to do some additional outreach this summer. There's going to be some mailers going out. There's going to be two mailings. One mailing will be kind of this sheet. This will be direct mail to everybody in the RAFTA jurisdiction. Then there'll be a second mailing probably sometime later in the month. We'll be having a technical advisory committee with David Peckler and some of the other good planners in the Valley later in the month. And at the August 9th board meeting, it's actually going to be a public hearing to give people an opportunity to weigh in on the proposed mill levy increase. And that's when the board's going to take formal action so that we can refer the ballot. So with that, that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sure there's maybe some questions or discussion, Mayor.
Ralph, I'll start off here quickly. When the poll was done, what part of the valley did you mostly call? Your map shows it all the way down to Parachute. Where was the most of the people that answered your poll?
Well, we tried to only call Democrats, but it didn't work. So no, I'm just kidding. The poll was normalized to the RAFTA jurisdiction. So if, let's say, and these aren't exact numbers, Bill Ray's not with us today, but if 10% of the RAFTA jurisdiction was in Newcastle, well, 10% of the calls went to Newcastle. If 20% were in Glenwood. So it was smoothed out to represent the population of the member communities and counties.
But you had a lot of people who didn't answer or didn't want to talk to you, so you must have moved on. So did you share the valley equally?
Yeah, well, it was, again, done demographically equally. So it was we actually had a total of about 340 responses. And so 35 of those responses were statistically thrown out to make sure that we still had the jurisdictional numbers to make the poll valid. And Bill Ray does a lot better job. If you'd like us, we can get you a more detailed explanation
It's
of that.
okay.
But it was fully intended to represent the cross-section of the RAFTA jurisdiction
Right, and
voters.
the number of voters within each.
I have one more question, since I'm on here. The improvements on some of the bus stops per the mill levy does not include the intercept lot's potential future, whatever might happen down there in regards to real bathrooms or a coffee shop. That's not included in this, correct?
B2, halfway down that list.
I believe it is.
I believe it is too.
I think it might have been pushed out in the 3.65 mill levy plan to be in that 2040 time.
You have it on there, which for the 3.55. But I don't remember seeing that there for the EOTC meeting. Was that just added?
No, it's been on the list.
Oh, okay.
It's been on the list. It's pretty far down, and, I mean, on the schedule, it's way out, because I think it envisions having 1,000 paved spaces at the intercept lot, and, you know, I think time will tell whether or not that's going to be needed, but, excuse me, I need to sit a little closer, I think, but, also, the county has gotten a flap grant, have they not? In the range of $2 million, which will need to be matched. I think the EOTC has kind of given a nod to putting in some match funds. So bathrooms would be added with that, and an additional 200 spaces would be paved. So in the short term, in the next year or two, I think that project is conceivably going to move forward. But it's now in the 2.65 mill levy plan. It's kind of on the unconstrained list because it's a significant cost. And the question is, when is that need going to really be here, where you're going to need 1,000 spaces down there paved?
So it's not necessarily overlap with the OTC, it's a matching, the funding that you're proposing for, say, Brush Creek Intercept Lot.
This project that's on this list is kind of a separate standalone project. I think it had in today's dollars, maybe an $8 million cost to upgrade that lot. That is separate from the grant that Pickens County got from, I think, FLAP for $2 million approximately. That's going to require some local match. And my understanding was that project was going to move forward in the short term, and it would supply some bathrooms and some additional paving to the part of the lot that's currently rotomilled, I think.
But does that project overlap any of the project that's on the rafter?
I don't think it overlaps, because the other one is paving 1,000 spaces in essence. And in our plan, in the 3.65 mill levy plan, it was way out in 2040, maybe 2041 timeframe that it was actually going to
But to do what?
happen.
Well, the description for C16 is BRT enhancements to the Brush Creek Intercept lot, and I don't have it all memorized, but it was improvements in the circulation, those sorts of things for the BRT.
I think David has got the
You got it,
detailed
David. You got
alternate
it.
summary. I think it's like paving about 1,000 spaces, and
Okay, let's see. Project will include paving, lighting, and landscaping.
You want to get the mic, Dave?
This is the FLAP grant, I think you need B2.
Oh, yeah, right. This is the FLAP grant.
The FLAP grant's about 3.9 million and is focusing probably on the services associated with the BRT station. B2, I'm beginning to guess is
I'll go
the
to B2.
lighting and paving
B2.
aspects, drainage, et cetera, that'd be relative to expansion of the parking lot itself.
we have another
Hang on.
alternative in there that is the
Yeah.
BRT
coming up here.
improvements. This,
Sorry.
What David's looking at
Yeah,
is a novel about this thick when you print it, of every one of these projects with the detailed cost estimates. So, we don't usually get, we don't usually pull that out, so.
that was a $8.5 million project. And
500
Another
additional.
500.
500 additional parking spaces.
So 8.5 million for 500 parking spaces is what this is earmarked for.
Yeah.
But I think you gotta
Got any
consider
more?
you're taking raw land and trying to address a number of issues. Again,
I think
utilities
there's
for lighting,
overlap in that.
drainage
Yeah.
for water control,
Right.
waste,
You know, we will get
So
to
what's our goal tonight? Is the goal to get a sense of where our jurisdiction lies on the mill levy?
Yes, that's
Okay,
why we're
okay.
out, we're doing all the electeds. You're only the second one we've been to. We were at Eagle County last week, so.
So one of the questions that I've heard, and some folks, is if we're talking about bus replacement as a top priority, very top priority, as well as electric buses to improve upon the environment, why would we think about any facility improvement unless it's a must-do?
Unless it's what?
Unless it's a must-do, must-have versus want. So the question becomes one, what is a top priority to sell a vote? Because I don't feel that the 3.65 is going to sell.
Right.
And you and I have had that conversation, so I think, as I said earlier, I think to you, Dan, and to George, is under 3. Facility improvements are nice to have, but are they a must-have? To me, what is important is the improvements either in service and/or environmental concerns and replacement of buses. I don't know what, and the other issue I've got some questions on is the bonding levels. And is that a good idea or not, but.
Well, I have a couple of things. So I go back to the 2008 sales tax. Does that have a sunset in it?
No,
No,
Does this have a sunset in it?
no.
not currently. I mean,
No.
the board hasn't referred it, so, that discussion really hasn't happened.
You know, obviously, some of these things are easier to deal with if something is sunsetting and something else goes to replace it. My other question really is, how much is the, so to speak, lost revenue for seniors riding free?
I can't give you an accurate assessment of that right now. I mean, I think that what we could do is look at our survey, our passenger survey information, the demographics there, and try to make some assumptions about what that is. And we are currently doing a fair equity study, which is taking a look at our pricing, the types of passes we offer, the equity in terms
Right.
of the zones and all those sorts
I
of
mean,
things.
I kind of have come away, because I also think, 365 is gonna be a hard sell. But I came away with, yes, it's nice to walk on a bus and say I'm a senior and I don't have to pay anything. But maybe there is a middle road where a senior can get some kind of a discount that seems to make sense, and RAFTA still gets some revenue out of that, and which really drove my original question. Because I have no idea what we're talking about in dollars, whether it's a lot or a little. So that's, I guess I would suggest or offer that, that you try to determine what that amount really is.
That may be hard by Thursday.
Well, I think we might be able to ballpark it. It's, what makes it challenging is, I mean, we'd have to kind of get into our detailed survey information and try to figure out where people are traveling to and from, and
Right.
what their age was, and then what the fare was with the discount and so forth. So it's a little bit more complicated than
Yeah.
it sounds, but I think we could try to get that number. I think it would help. Any additional revenue would help, but I don't think that it will, eliminate the need for us to pursue some additional revenue, just because of the sheer magnitude of the cost of replacing buses over time.
Is the 2040 proposal, when is that supposed to take effect, in what tax year?
If it were approved in 2018, then it would go into effect in 2019.
So another thought, the original 2008 sales tax increase was supposed to carry RAFTA through 2020.
Mhm.
So rather than start another program a year before your original estimates, start this 2040 program in 2020.
There's some upsides and downsides to that suggestion, just from my little corner of the world. The waiting list to get electric buses is far more than a year, isn't it? To get it even on the list.
Yeah, well, just about any bus is going to take, I think, generally speaking, about a minimum of 12 months, if not longer, to go through the procurement process and then contract and then have them delivered. And while we can certainly delay, I mean, if the board decides not to go, then we're going to delay. If the board decides to go and we don't succeed, then we're going to have to delay. But the longer we delay, the more difficult there's more replacements coming at us and so forth.
Just
The
kicking the
curve is
can.
going to be
Yeah,
steeper.
I understand, but I guess where I'm coming from is you can market to the valley and your customer base that this, 10 years ago, we asked you for X and you gave it to us, and we told you that this would cover us until a certain date, and we did. We follow through, and we're able to do what we say we're gonna do when we say it. And when we project, because 10 years is that's a fairly long time, and it's not easy to project over a period of time like 10 years, as it's not easy to project over this 20-year period either. But I think you gain credibility with your ask when you say, we're gonna institute this property tax increase in 2020, when the other one, which we had told you about, or which you approved in 2008, when that reached its end point.
So if I understand correctly, go ahead, go to the polls. But in the ballot question, you would have language would say that while this might be approved in 2019, it would not be imposed until 2020.
Yeah.
So it'd be consistent with what we told voters back in
Yeah,
2000.
I think that helps your credibility, but I'm only, one person.
In the way the taxes work, I don't think it'd be collected till 2020, would it? If approved in 18, it'd be assessed in 19 and collected in 20.
Yeah.
Well, that's
From
true.
what I've heard is that it would be collected in 19, but I will double check and make sure.
Yeah, that's
Because
a
we-
good point.
Might be a
Clinton.
moot point if it isn't actually
think it's-
collected.
It's a property tax, and it'll be levied in 19,
19 and collected in 20.
it'll be collected in 20.
I hadn't thought
Collected in
about
20,
that
so-
perspective.
So it actually isn't collected until 20, so would that,
Yeah, that would probably,
okay.
That gets into the ballot language.
That's the language that you want.
If you go to the ballot in 20, you're not gonna get it till
22.
22, yeah.
We need it well
You
before
go to the
then.
ballot in 19, so.
So you're helping us make our case for going.
I'm restoring your credibility.
Yeah, thank you. We need all the help we can get.
You need a mic.
No, I don't.
This man's gonna tell you.
Nice, he's not gonna tell you, he's gonna give you one.
Thanks.
Just going back to the mayor's question about kind of the priority list, some of these items that are kind of in the status quo aren't politically sexy, harder to sell, new buildings and that type of thing. I guess the same question she's asking, those are those need to be in that very highest priority?
Well, the list that you're looking at here and the one that was on the screen up there has been modified to get us into the 2.65 range. So there are a number of the the phases of the aspen maintenance facility improvements that are down on the unconstrained list now. And the Glenwood Maintenance Facility, which is really one that I believe needs to be expanded because we are crammed in
Right,
to
yeah.
our maintenance facility now. You're all welcome to come down and take a look. And we get reports of people almost being hit by buses that are pulling out or pulling in, and we have a significant number of dings and what have you with buses that are running into each other. So it is a safety issue, plus our ability to really expand into the future to handle some of the 25% plus growth that's coming at us, we think, in the next 20 years, is constrained unless we can actually make that facility suitable to be able to handle all the buses that we're going to have to stage there and maintain. So I'd say that's a priority, but what we have done, whereas in the old plan, that was a $32 million cost with a 10% grant assumption, it's now a $30 million cost with a 50% grant assumption. We are applying for build funds. The old Tiger Grant program has been now changed into the build program. We're applying for that. We are on CDOT's list of projects that would be funded using bond proceeds if the .62 sales tax were to pass. And we'll keep looking for every source of funding that we can to help reduce how much we actually have to pay to get that facility expanded, but it definitely is a priority.
Hey, Dan, just in terms of 2.65 list, I saw a 2 mil list here, and the 3.55, 3.65. Do we have a 2.65 or 2.5?
In your board agenda packet, Markey, which, just went out on
You
Friday.
know, I looked at that. I guess I must be blind.
I think in the PowerPoint, in
Yes.
the portfolio, there was a chart like this
Okay.
one.
Hold on, let me get to the right
And
place.
after the board meeting, then when we go out to the jurisdictions, we'll have that incorporated into it. But it was kind of late-breaking stuff that we were working on the past week or so.
I think it was slide 9, Marky.
I'm looking for it. See it?
But does it essentially just, cut in half between our 3.55 and 2 mil?
No, it's a little more of a learned exercise than that, I think. And
Well, what we did was we went down, and again, what we're doing with any list that we develop is, it's just for conversation, it's discussion purposes. We're gonna have the meeting with the board. We've gotten some feedback from members of the board that they felt like, 3.65 was not going to be something that would be passable potentially, and that, based on our polling information, we picked up some additional support when people were told that maybe it could be reduced to somewhere in the 2.6 range. So we knocked a mil off of it, brought it down to 2.65, and then went down the list. In some cases, we reduced the cost of projects, as in the case of employee housing and office space, from 20 million to 10 million. The trail project, we brought down to something that was in the range of 6.5 from something that was about 11 million. We eliminated 6 of the replacement buses that were in the schedule, 6 of the 16. We assumed a 5% reduction in existing regional services to try to make them more efficient. And like I said, we assumed that we could maybe get 50% of the cost of the Glenwood Maintenance Facility covered.
Can you pull up the PowerPoint? I can't, there's no,
sorry, I don't have that
Oh,
with
David? David probably could.
David, do you have the board packet?
Yeah,
I don't see the
bring it up, yeah.
PowerPoint
I'm not
attached.
sure we'll be able to, it's, when you go into the portfolio document, that was
could be it.
part of
Yeah,
that.
it's a PDF, it's not in
It's gonna be about the
Yeah,
third one down.
I gotta get a different app.
And I apologize that we didn't have a copy of that list here to show you. So it was just an exercise in looking at some of the improvements to try to get that list cut down, but still retain some of the things that we think are polling fairly well. The improved services, the electric buses, for example. I mean, if we were to go from electric buses to diesel buses, for example, or possibly have more CNG bus replacements, we could probably get the cost down some more as well. Yeah, can
And
you,
the grants that you're referring to are generally federal grants?
there's a combination of state grants. Right now, there's funding that's available, I think, from Senate Bill 228. There's faster funds, and then there may be some funds that would be available from the .62 sales tax if it passes, although we don't think that it's going to eliminate the need for us to actually pass this
I don't have it.
bond levy, or the mill levy of some amount. At the federal level, we're competing with every transit system in the United States for funding that would come through low-no. There's funds available for low or no emissions vehicles. We applied for $3 million. In 17, we got $715,000, right? There's Section
Yeah, I guess.
5339,
I
which
know
is
that
bus and
before.
facilities. There's currently a call for projects, there's $336 million available. But every transit system in the state, plus every transit system in the nation, will be going after that, so there probably will be $1 billion or more of ask for that funding. It's pretty political in terms of how it gets administered and allocated. So that's our challenge, is that we are the second biggest transit system in Colorado. We believe we're the biggest rural transit system in the United States. And if we were an urban system, we would get formula funds based on our population and our passengers and revenue miles and that sort of thing. But since we're rural, the funding that's available to us comes through the state. It's called Section 5311, operating administrative assistance and capital. And there's about $10 million roughly to go around. And we get some of that, and we get our share of the FASTER and the Senate Bill 28 funds. But if it's more than $1 million or $2 million a year, we're really doing pretty well in that respect, because there's so much competition for it.
And are you seeing or hearing some pressure coming against those federal grants as well? Are those gonna be reduced?
Well, we hear from time to time that the current administration, or one of the planks in the Republican platform, was to, over some period of time, 5 years or so, to eliminate the Federal Transit Administration. I think the biggest problem that they have with the FTA is on the New Starts program for fixed guideways, rail systems, and that sort of thing in urbanized areas. I think it'll be challenging for them to totally eliminate funding for rural programs in particular. But there is pressure. There's always kind of pressure. But fortunately, right now, it seems like there's enough support in Congress on both sides of the aisle to maintain it, even though I think there have been some cutbacks proposed by the president's budget.
So one,
There is the project list, and I apologize, we hadn't intended to present today. It's going to the board, but you can get a feel. Let me stand up and maybe I can get a little bit closer
Can
here.
that actually be
Well,
maybe
I don't know that I can make it much bigger without losing the whole document, Dan.
well, let's
can read it.
just see.
I'm not that familiar with PDFs.
Let's just see if we can.
You're gonna lose some.
Yeah, but I think I can bring some of it
Yeah, you
back,
just move it
so.
over.
So.
So I saw the overpass, or underpass, the buttermilk?
Yeah,
That's gone, I think.
No, it was
That's
still
in the
there.
unconstrained list.
Butter- Yeah, it's D2. Yeah, I don't even know why it's still there. ELTC didn't get really excited about that.
let's see here. This is, I always.
There's a lot on the,
So let's,
Glenwood
the
Springs.
services are there under either proposal, so.
Yeah, we can go to the
so
top.
I think we can go to about here and get just about everything.
I think there's still quite a bit of debate on that pedestrian crossing. And then you,
And that was only a $500,000
Yeah.
contribution.
oh, okay.
That's not the full 8 or 9
I
million.
was
That was
gonna
just
say
a.
that
yeah.
8 million, that's
The-
kind of,
You may not recall, but the assumption was that all the PED crossings would be funded at $500,000 each. So any of them that are in there for $500,000 plus, and if they're out there for half.
Well, no, I believe that the 27th Street was, and 23rd were like 4 million or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
there was a higher, because we have the trail down there, and it crosses 27th Street, and
Right.
it's pretty hazardous, and then we have 27 Grand Avenue to get across. So I think
Right.
our overall contribution, this is another thing that David could look up if we weren't using his computer right now.
That's a pretty nasty crossing. I know that one well.
It is, and what, you know,
27th Street,
That's the one by the Walmart or the traffic light?
no,
Into
well,
the-
it's the one that goes across the bridge.
So you can see there that Carbondale BRT parking expansion, that's not
Over to
included.
Walmart, the back way.
Aspen Junction Park and Ride expansion, that's not included. Newcastle Park and Ride, not included. Upper Valley Parking Management System Study, that was about a $300,000 cost, and we figured we might be able to pick up some grant funds to handle that. BRT enhancements to Brush Creek, 500 parking spaces paved. That was taken to the unconstrained list. Micro transit accommodation BRT stations, it's not a big dollar amount, but we thought we could pull that out. Aspen maintenance facility, additional bus storage. While that might be nice to have, we're getting most of the buses inside now, and most of the expansion in terms of fleet and where that would be staged is gonna happen down in Glenwood Springs, we think, over time. So that one got moved to the unconstrained list. Expansion of employee housing, Carbondale, in Carbondale office space. That was, I believe, intended, there was an initial ask in the plan for some office space and housing, and then coming back in the 2030 to 2040 timeframe and expansion of that. We pulled that out and cut in half the overall cost of housing and the office space to somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million in Carbondale, and we pursue grants for that. Pedestrian crossing 23rd Street in Glenwood, well, there's only, so much that we can do with 2.65 mils, and if we can get the crossing of 27th Street and Grand Avenue done, that would be a
That'd
huge
be-
improvement there.
That's more of a priority.
And then some of the enhanced crossing of the trail at 14th Street, that was about $160,000 to $175,000 cost that was in the plan. And then in terms of C&G for the Aspen Maintenance Facility, that may be something that we really never need to do. Because unless we convert the whole fleet to CNG, the cost of the facility modifications that we would have to make with methane sensors and ventilation and so forth, plus the cost of the compressor station, would be so great that it would not really be cost efficient for us to do it unless we were planning on, fueling 30 to 40 CNG buses at that facility. Right now, with the expansion that we're doing down in Glenwood Springs, we could probably do somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50 buses or so comfortably with the current compressor station, and I think we have about 30 some odd buses, 32 or 33 CNG buses currently in the fleet. So that one just didn't make sense, and that got pulled and put into the
So Dan,
unconstrained list.
the electrical buses going up, in the great world, and everything goes through here, you get the electric buses. So if that happens, they'll go to the intercept lot, then there'll be diesel buses coming up here? Because the electric buses, my understanding is that they're not gonna be able to come up here, correct?
Well, I think it's, the jury is somewhat out, and, we're at the board meeting on Thursday, we're going to ask the board to approve a supplemental budget appropriation that will provide the funding in our budget to move forward with an 8-bus battery electric bus program. Those buses should be delivered, we think, by next summer, early fall. That's the fleet that we want to experiment with to see, what their range is, what their pulling capacities are, how they work in the wintertime when all of the heating stuff is on and the air conditioning in the summer. And assuming that they seem workable, then we will continue to expand our use of electric buses. But everything that we've heard is that the technology is rapidly improving in terms of the range of the batteries. And there are also inline charging stations. One could be potentially put up at the mall where you have a catenary and the bus pulls in. They can be in the ground as well. And we usually have about 15 to 20 minutes of downtime there. So every time a bus made a run, it could top off its batteries. Or it could be, maybe some of these charging stations could be put at Brush Creek. We might put them at Ruby Park, might put some up at Highlands, if it turns out that the range of the batteries is not sufficient to enable buses to be out there and stay out all day.
We're not
like
gonna
diesels.
know that until you get them, right?
Well, we don't know everything about them, and, you know, there's a lot that we're going to learn. What we do believe is that that's the direction that the industry is moving, and Park City has already gotten battery electric buses, and they're running them from.
Park City's only 4,000, 5,000 feet.
I don't know that it's the. I don't know what the grade is from their parking right lot up to their up to their town is. So yeah, that's an issue. But we've had battery electric buses out here. We've run them up and down to Snowmass. Whether or not they, I think it would be perhaps premature to say that they would never work in this climate or in, you know, on the grades that we
It's
have.
also premature to think that they're gonna work, and then we're counting on it, and then we're gonna be disappointed.
Well, that's true. I mean, you make a good point. If it turns out that they don't work, then, you know, we would have some additional money in our plan to do some other things like more services and buy more CNG buses and do facility upgrades and those kinds of things. But I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that we're probably only going to get so many bites at this apple, and I believe that the technology has come along far enough, and it's being utilized enough that there is a pretty high level of confidence that it's going to be workable. But it's not. No technology that we have. I mean, we got CNG buses, and they were blowing the pistons, and the manufacturer had to step up, and they had to, you know, engineer new pistons. Diesel buses have catalytic converters that plugged up, and we had to have the buses towed to Grand Junction to be fixed. I mean, everything we have to work on because of our altitude, and this is another one of those things.
But I think there has been some demo runs of the electric buses up here, so I think, I don't want to confuse people by using the term workable or non-workable. The current intent is to run the short hauls, because they've been demonstrated to work on the short hauls. The long haul from Glenwood up remains to be seen, but the manufacturers are all making huge inroads, and in China, these buses are running that distance, is my understanding. So this initial set of battery electric buses are really intended to be short-range buses, is my understanding.
Well, the 8 buses that we're getting, we're planning on using almost exclusively in the Upper Valley, you know, in the city of Aspen, and we'll try them on Maroon Bells. We'll try running them over to Snowmass and try to get some experience with them. Eventually, we would like to be able to run them down to Glenwood Springs, and there are over-the-road coach manufacturers like MCI that are developing battery electric buses for longer haul type service. So, you know, is it a guarantee that they will work? No, I don't think I can guarantee it, but I do know that we're highly motivated to make them work. Because when you spend $1 million on a bus, you
It better work.
better not just sit in the barn all the time.
So it's getting close to the witching hour. Back to the ballot question.
I just wanted to ask a question
okay.
about bonding, because you had mentioned
Yep,
bonding, but in the 2.65 mil scenario, what is the bonding level still at $100 million, or is it decreased?
I think it's come down. I don't have, you know, hopefully by Thursday, we can try to get an estimate of that for the board. But it will have decreased because we reduced some projects. What hasn't decreased is the assumption about to any great degree, the assumption about lease purchase financing for buses. So that's still a big number, but we don't have to get voter approval for those leases because they're subject to annual appropriations.
Okay. Just curiosity, does RAFTA qualify for municipal bonding?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, we tax exempt bonding?
Yeah, tax exempt
Yeah.
bonding is what I meant,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm. And I think that's built into our assumptions. The 2.65 mil levy, unlike the other four scenarios that were shown up here, is assuming that due to Gallagher, the assessment rate for residential is going to decline to 6.11 next year. So we made that change, and we also, based on feedback that we've gotten, and a trend of assessed valuation increases on average for the last 20 years that we got from CMC, we assumed 4%
Okay.
annual increase in the assessed valuation as opposed to 3%, which we were assuming in these original models that we were looking at.
So the 3.65 that was on here for residents at $10.95 a month, what does that go down to?
I think we can get that number for Thursday. I
Thursday.
would just be,
I mean,
it was
just
about a
did it
20,
on a percentual basis.
it's about a 27% reduction in the mill levy.
So I've, about $8 is what I calculated.
Yeah, 775, I think,
$8, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, there's some question in
Seven-
my mind, at least, about the
795.
sensitivity, but
So what's
So-
your political read?
So about the cost of one bus ride to Glenwood, right, is what you're asking voters to pony up for a month for $500,000 of assessed value,
Yeah, the cash fare is $7 from Glenwood to Aspen or Snowmass.
right? I'm curious to know, the circulators don't make the list at any funding level. It seems like, I mean, Snowmass and Aspen essentially have circulators. Those guys are further from the BRT stops. It would seem like that would be a priority, especially since parking is so restricted at those bus stops.
Well, the history on the formation of the Transportation Authority back in 2000 is that the mission of RAFTA is to operate the regional trunk line commuter services. Our mission, although we can contract with the city of Aspen and Glenwood Springs to provide their services, wasn't the mission of the Transportation Authority to help fund those, and they both pay for them. So kind of the debate is, while there would be some benefits to the regional services by having circulators bringing people to stops and so forth, wouldn't need as many park and ride spaces and that sort of thing in the future. The question is one of equity, really, for Glenwood Springs and for Aspen, who are paying for their services, and then these other communities get that tab kind of paid for by RAFTA using resources that were intended to be for regional services. That's a discussion that the board could certainly have at some point in
Yeah,
time.
we had a whole discussion on circulators way back when we got in this, and if my memory serves me well, we talked about the municipality needs to fund their own circulators like Glenwood does, Aspen does, Snowmass does. That's how we landed on it.
I mean, isn't one of the sort of alternatives to motorized circulators, the expanding the bike share?
But that closes in
Situated.
October. Yeah, the bike share program's great, but it's gone. It closed in Basalt with longer winter, or longer
Does it stay
fall.
open in
Winter
Carbondale?
time, no, during the winter
Put them
time.
all away.
It-
Put 'em all away.
In the plan, we have, some funding for expansion of bike share into Carbondale and Glenwood Springs.
Mhm.
And I believe that Myrta Mallory would like to experiment a few places to see whether or not they might be workable in wintertime. Some of the winters we've had lately, it's
They should work.
possible.
Work a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But she hasn't yet had an opportunity to do that. And, but first last mile
Yeah.
kinds of technologies, whether they're e-bikes, whether they're bike share bikes, whether they're little skateboards with motors on them and those kinds of things. There are a lot of those types of technologies that are becoming available, and Greg Polshman just went to, is, Picken County Commissioner, got an email from him on Sunday. He'd been to Italy and riding on the bike trails there, and he saw a number of these first last mile technologies in action, and he's really enthused about it. So I think there's a lot of potential to reduce pressure on the park and ride lots in the future by encouraging people to do more of those kinds of things.
Right. But the circulator is a different level.
The challenge with the circulators in, for example, the Mid-Valley is that that's a very spread out area, and it's on both sides of the highway, and so it takes a lot of resources. And for one of the shuttles that we might provide for the city of Aspen, the cost on an annual basis, from 6 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning, is over $500,000 a year. So if you needed to have 3 or 4 of these running around the Mid-Valley area in order to provide a convenient service, it adds up. And it might be a 2% sales tax that Basalt would have to pass to even have a shot at funding
Right.
something like that. And that's, it's a bit of a drawback for them.
Okay, colleagues, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think if anything, this is just Snowmass now, right? But
Yep.
if anything's gonna pass here, it's gonna be 265. I mean, people are concerned. I mean, we've had three not insignificant property tax increases in the last year, well, I guess the last 2 tax years, and the potential for the sales tax increase is out there also. I just think less is better in this case for trying to get approval.
Well, your comments are noted and well taken, and you're moving that direction. And the board's going to have, I think, a very healthy discussion about this on Thursday. And, it yet remains to be seen whether 2.65 will be the number, if it'll come down below that, or if the board will move forward at all. So your feedback is
Well, then I guess I'm gonna augment my feedback to say less is better. The lower the number,
More likely.
the more opportunity there will be to get it approved.
And I agree with that, and I also agree that maybe it shouldn't be 2040, maybe that the time period should be cut in half, that maybe some of these other mill levies will sunset, and then RAFTA could come back up again.
Good point. Okay.
Well, one thing I will say is that on this list, many of the things that were cut were in that 2030 to 2040 timeframe. So now it's more front-loaded, 2020 to 2030. So we'd have to change all the brochures we just printed, but maybe it's a worthwhile investment.
We don't want to spend money on paper.
2025.
Just use a bunch of whiteout, that's okay.
Yeah, that looks. Bill, where are you thinking?
Well, I think just as far as our goals is trying to be environmentally sustainable, trying to get people on buses, I'm really of the mind that we should be pushing for 365 because there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not, confident that it'll pass, but I can just see the need of where we're going and the expansion that's gonna be required. And if we're gonna get people off our roads, we're gonna have to invest in it, so.
Well, I agree with you. I think it's very important that we keep RAPTA running strong. And have a fleet that's replaced on a timely basis so that the vehicles are efficient and comfortable and safe for people. So we're not running kind of a ragtag fleet that, where we haven't replaced vehicles for 20 years. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And I also think that kind of improving the services, you may or may not be aware that after 8:15, service goes to every hour below Elgibel to Glenwood Springs, and that's kind of the way it's been ever since the Transportation Authority has been created. And so anybody that's working in Snowmass or Aspen, except in the wintertime when there's a BRT bus, 1 per hour, has really got to think about making that connection down at Brush Creek. And sometimes that gets missed, and they got to wait out in the cold for an hour. And you do that, you miss it a couple of times. If you've got another alternative, like a car or something, you're probably going to use it. So I think some of these service improvements that we're planning would lend themselves to more people using the service because it'll just be a lot more convenient.
Well, I guess one of the takeaways is wanting to see this get passed, getting something to get passed, so there's some money for RAFTA. And we know we've got the Healthy Community Fund coming back up on Pitkin, and I think they're looking at an increase for Healthy Community.
You bet.
And it's pulling very, very strong right now. I don't know what else is coming on the ballot in terms of
How much
taxes.
is the healthy community ask?
I don't even remember what it is now. John is the keeper of information.
Nah, I'm the county.
Yeah, you know everything.
My station's out here.
I saw some information that George
Yes.
Newman sent around, and to extend the existing tax, which I think is going to sunset.
It sunsets, and so,
There's like 80% or more people that are willing to do that, but the support does kind of tend to taper off.
As it goes
with
up.
just very marginal increases.
yeah, it was like it was a skosh, if you will,
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
and the polling dropped.
Right.
But it had 80% favorability to renew it.
Extend
Renew itself
Yes,
as where it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Well, we really thank you for your time and
Thank
for your
you.
questions and for your input. We do
Thanks for
appreciate it.
coming. and,
Thanks for coming, Dan.
So I got
Ralph.
2 at 2.65, less is better, and then I've got 1 at 3.65, okay.
Maybe we have 2 ballot questions. and see.
Maybe that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, maybe it isn't a bad idea.
I'm just kidding for any viewers.
Yeah, it's not a good idea.
Man, it's been a lot of work.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
For your
Good luck.
time.
Just one quick question before you go. What is Bill thinking in terms of the polling, that a number, what percentage really gives you some confidence? I'm sure it's like 60 or 70% in terms of something that might
Well,
pass.
Bill, when we first started with Bill, Markey, he liked, the term he used was a slam dunk was polling at 60%. That's what I remember him saying.
Okay,
Yeah, so,
okay. Thanks.
and there's no slam dunks in this business anymore, I don't think.
There's no slam dunk in this one.
Pretty hard.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to take a quick, well, guys,
Want to take 5?
yeah, let's take 5. This is not going to go well.
Taking 5?
Take 5.
Is that what I heard?
Well,
Yeah, well.
that wouldn't have been the first time.
Actually, I think we were in default.
We're pleased and proud to know that. Better get started on it.
Now we can talk about the liquidated damages every day that goes by.
Is the marijuana sales tax.
So I don't have much in way of a presentation. This is just kind of to kick off the conversation about a possible additional sales tax on marijuana sales in Snowmass Village. We've kind of discussed it as we've discussed marijuana in general, and so this is kind of a chance for us to discuss this separately and in particular. Should the town council want to pursue an additional sales tax, that would have to be passed by the voters, and staff would begin preparing ballot language for the town council to officially consider and approve.
I thought that was a motion and approval by 3 members of council for the sales tax.
Honestly, we were unclear on some of that direction, and that's why this is, we know that the regulatory framework was certainly that 3-2 direction that we received, and that's what we are working on developing that framework, and that those regulations can be approved by the council themselves.
No, but this wasn't an additional vote, was the marijuana tax.
Well,
Was
that's what, so we've heard different things from different folks, and that's why we thought, you know what, let's go ahead and get this scheduled, make sure that we're working in the right direction and understand, you know, what the council is, what the council's desire. We've heard some things, you know, in a council conversation we've had with Councilor Circus, hey, can we pass a tax and maybe not implement it? Can we do it different rates? Can we do different things? And so we thought we would just provide this information and see if it's something that we just missed or we want to explore further and get some refined direction from y'all. Because we honestly, we weren't exactly sure how to proceed with this tax question.
Marky, when you were not at that meeting, we had 2 people from the public who were involved with the marijuana cannabis business. And they gave us some numbers that of the taxes that different municipalities charge.
Marky was here.
Yeah, I
for
was
that.
gonna say that.
I was here.
Oh, you were at
Yes.
that meeting, okay,
Yeah.
I heard-
okay,
yeah,
I'm
I-
confused, I'm
She
sorry.
just, she
Yeah.
just
I'm
missed last week.
confused, okay,
I just missed the last week.
okay, so,
So I went back and looked at that presentation and what we approved.
okay,
You
What?
didn't approve
Well, there was a
anything other than
resolution.
a motion, not a resolution.
A motion.
Motion to direct staff.
Yep.
To go in and prepare a set of regulations
so,
to consider.
in any case,
There were 2 votes. Okay,
in any case, I went back to try to reconstitute what, those numbers, and I, as a starting point, I would like to go over what the taxes would look like, without additional sales and without additional excise tax, so that we all have the same starting point from which to work from. So, Travis, can you help us work through that?
Yeah, I think I would summarize it by saying taxes on retail marijuana are significantly higher than medical marijuana. The sales tax that we have in place now, the 10.4%, would apply to both regardless, and any additional sales tax that we were to consider could apply to one or the other.
My understanding from that meeting was that the county, the state gives up its sales tax, and replaces it with a 15% excise tax.
No,
That is actually,
that is,
they dropped the 2.9 standard sales tax and put on
So-
a 15%
so
for
we're-
retail only, but medical still pays the 2.9%,
Okay.
the standard.
So, but if that's the case, then we don't start off at 10.4. We start off at something less than 10.4. Well, that's where I,
It would never be less than 10.4.
what?
It's just their percentage, right? It's just, the state's drops by
This
2.9.
discussion, we control 3.5%. I think that would be the question for this board is the 3.5% sales tax.
well, again, I know, I think we get 1.5% from the state, from the state's excise tax.
Correct.
So we get 5%.
But I guess my point is, it's a question that I understand that we're trying to get an answer to is, would we ask to keep our tax rate the same
Yeah,
or to increase our tax rate? Just for simplicity, I'm gonna call it a sales tax rate.
Right.
Right now, it's 3.5% for the town.
okay.
And so the question is, I mean, that's going to be on on retail marijuana, 3.5%.
Right.
So would you want to have an additional tax on retail marijuana? It's really the question. If you don't want to have any additional tax rate controlled by the town, then we don't have to put a question to the voters.
Yeah, I realize that, but what I'm trying to get at is, what is the total tax rate
Okay.
for recreational marijuana?
Your math on it.
The state's 2.9 sales tax. 15 minus 2.9,
Yeah,
you're gonna add 12.9, I mean, 12.1 to whatever your tax rate is.
and what's Picken County? 3.6?
3.6.
It doesn't matter, that doesn't get waived.
No, I know that. I know it doesn't
Okay.
get waived. I know it doesn't get waived.
We're pulling up some pictures and numbers for you.
So essentially, your sales tax rate here would be 22.5.
With
Okay,
a 5%
that's right,
excise.
okay.
Without doing anything.
Without doing anything.
That would just be the state, because they waive the 2.9 and then they apply 15.
Okay.
And so the sample language that we got just makes some assumptions, similar to the research that Travis did. So it's just asking, if we take in another $100,000,
Yeah, that language you see in there, that's language from a number of different municipalities. Tabor requires you to put the maximum amount of revenue you think you might bring in from a new tax. And so the standard strategy for municipalities is to take whatever your best estimate is and increase it, because it's a Tabor restriction at that point. So you want to make sure that you guess high and put a higher number in that ballot language. Anything below that would not be subject to Tabor. Anything, if revenue came in above that, then it's subject to
You
Tabor.
potentially have to give it back
Correct. To the voters,
to the voters.
yeah. And so.
another
Just a
$100,000.
standard strategy is to take
That's,
your
those,
best
that
estimate.
language you see in there, that's language from a number of different municipalities. Tabor requires you to put the maximum.
Sorry.
That guy
This is
sounded
impressive.
ridiculous. Don't believe a word that
I think
guy
I
was
heard that
saying.
already.
That's ridiculous.
It's complicated, we gotta hear it twice.
That's what we sound like. So this is a breakdown of our tax rate here in Snowmass Village. And this is for all sales, regardless of the product, including marijuana.
Except for lodging, right?
No.
That's
Right.
a good point. Lodging does
It's
have an
even strike
additional
down, yeah.
tax.
Okay.
would be in.
Lodging would be 2.5 on top of that for hotel rooms.
It looked like most of the municipalities are anywhere from 2 to 5%. Is 5% the top threshold one can go, or is that, you could go 10 or 15%, right?
Yeah, there's no limit. I think 5% just has been
That seemed to
standard.
be the standard
Right.
on most all these municipalities that I read through all the detail.
What's the difference between, John, this might be a question for you, but what's the difference between a sales tax and an excise tax?
Excise tax is a single item, but it's collected just like a sales tax. You pay it at the time of sale. In other words, sales tax applies to all.
Yeah,
Excise tax only applies to one category.
I see. So does that mean it's easier to write to write a ballot initiative for a sales tax? It's more general than a ballot initiative for excise tax, because excise tax only applies to certain specific items?
No, it's no more difficult.
You just have to list all the items.
It's usually one item.
If you read these.
Well, if you read, yeah, these show
It is.
retail marijuana, but they list a whole bunch of different,
It's all marijuana. though.
yeah,
It's
all
marijuana as the major category with the subcomponents
They're
thereof.
just making sure that it's spelled out right, so that they're covering. Some of these are not extremely well drafted.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at it, and I think for today's, call it a sales tax, but it's a sales tax on marijuana. Technically speaking, it's an excise tax because it's on that one specific product, but because sometimes an excise tax can be on the backside that is paid differently. So to kind of make sure we're all saying the same words, I think what you're all considering is an additional sales tax on marijuana.
And
I think the question you're trying to consider.
And I think getting into the weeds on these is premature,
It's very much so.
because I think one of the questions you need to consider is, there's two thoughts that seem to come up frequently in the marijuana discussions that you've had. You're losing out on all this tax revenue, is one of them. And the other one is, you're losing a lot of business to Aspen because there are no dispensaries or medical marijuana retailers or retail recreational marijuana shops in Snowmass Village. So you're losing all that business to Aspen. So when you get to the sales tax question, understand that Aspen does not impose a sales tax. They take their percentage of what the state gives them out of their 15% excise tax, and they take that, and that's it. So if you're trying to prevent leakage, if you have a higher priced marijuana because of your tax than Aspen's, you've kind of defeated one of those potential goals. I'm not saying they are, but to me, those are the two big things that have come up in discussions from the public that you've heard. You're missing out on all this revenue, and the other one is we're losing business to Aspen. So I don't know how you want to go on that, but understand that those are, in my mind, competing values. So if you decide that, yes, we want that revenue that will be produced by the sales tax, then we'll get into all these weeds. But you're then making a policy decision on, we're really worried about the leakage. So.
Right, so based on Travis's numbers, we're guessing maybe on the high end, $150,000 in tax revenue?
I think the low was 90, wasn't it?
Right, so if we go with the high number, like the ballot language does, and we're looking at 5% on 150,000 is what, 7,500 bucks?
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at, when you look at, Travis just pulled it up, look at the general fund versus, marketing fund. So, I mean, for the general fund, which is, you got more discretion with, you're looking between $20,000 and $60,000.
Marketing, you're looking at 50 to 150, and then
Yeah.
you're gonna get the local share regardless.
So roughly speaking, for every % extra sales tax, rough number, could be $20,000 to $30,000 per percent. 60, sorry, I was doing math in my head, that's good. When we call it excise tax up here, you can, I mean, yeah, that's, we went back and forth about what to call it.
Just call it excise. Call it what
Whatever
it
you
is.
want.
Doesn't matter. So,
Put it back to 5% again.
so here's my, I mean, this is a thought. How much additional cost, differential, how much differential between Aspen and Snowmass in terms of tax would make it worthwhile for people to go to Aspen instead of buying people who are here, instead of buying what's here, go to Aspen. That comes back,
It goes back to what I brought up to you.
exactly comes back
And
to
I
you.
don't think it's quantifiable, because there are a variety, the example I gave today was, there's two couples out here on vacation. They're trying to decide what to do for dinner. Two of them want to stay here, have dinner where it's cheaper, and buy some weed. And the other two want to go where dinner's more expensive and buy some weed. Okay? So what are you gonna do? Stay where dinner's cheaper and the weed's more expensive, or go where dinner's more expensive and the weed's cheaper? So I don't think
I don't think
you
it's
could
so
ever analyze that in a way that that's why I used the broad term leakage.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't even know if there is leakage for this reason. That's what we
Oh,
have been
no, I
told.
think we know that.
No, I don't. I have never seen any quantification of that.
Well, I know.
We didn't hear quantification, but we heard from one of the shop owners that says to get customers into the community that charges the excise, she has to lower her price to get, so they don't drive by and go to the next one. And I think
That
when
was
you.
in Carbondale.
Right.
Right, that was the combination, and I understand.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at an example of some of the examples that you have in your questions and how they pass and the tax rates that they pass, I think you need to be very careful to consider, are they a large area served by one legalized place? Or are they in a series of places like the Front Range or our valley, where they're up and down the valley? So what's the proximity of the price point? Because that factor is just like the one I
Right.
gave the example
Right,
of.
right.
You can't quantify it. It's, and I don't want to say it's a feeling, because you can probably get real numbers to it.
But it gets into a need and a want. So if I'm a guest here in Snowmass Village and I want weed and it's available here, do you think I'm gonna go hop on a bus to go to Aspen to save a few bucks?
Well, the
If-
average
if
spend
all
they
you
told
want
us
is to-
last week was.
If all you want is to get weed, then it probably doesn't make any difference. But coming back to John's, scenario, what's happening now is people get on the bus or drive or have themselves taken over, and they plan out a whole series of things, not just to go buy weed and come back. And that's what I think we should be trying to stop.
Well,
Yeah, and based on what they told us last week, the average spend is about $100. So, $5, is that gonna make a difference on,
No.
you know, if you're
Not when
coming
you're
or
paying
going?
$500 a night for a hotel room.
Well, exactly, and most of our lodges charge an additional 20% service fee. Which
For
is.
what?
Good. It's a way for them to advertise lower rates, I guess.
It's a resort fee. I mean, they don't, it's,
Resort fee.
Well, Aspen charges a resort fee.
I hate
So does
resort
Vail.
fees.
But it's a big number. I mean, it's not,
It's huge. Well, stay in Beaver Creek.
yeah.
Well, I mean, after having given this some thought since, you know, a month ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever, my preference is to leave it with, just as it is with the top half of that, and don't add any additional excise or sales tax. Because I want to give our guests the greatest opportunity to buy here and stay here. And I think that's one way to do it.
I'm in agreement with that, and it's also because we're so seasonal, and the local people will stay here during the off-season as well, and hopefully we'll have more restaurants open for the off-season, and then we will be generating some tax dollars at that point, as opposed to the local people going into Aspen during the shoulder seasons, doing the same thing.
I mean, I think those are all valid arguments. I think the money is also a real valid argument as well. And I was talking to Brian Olson about a grant that he just got to get funding for our mental health facilities, which is, I think it's a 3-year grant, which is going to expire, and then they're going to be coming back to us for those dollars at some point as well.
What mental health facilities?
I guess it's a detox center?
This is Mind Springs.
Mind Springs.
Mind Springs is a part of a whole initiative on tax dollars. Yeah, it's a 3-year window that people have to come back for.
Right.
Yeah.
So my point is that once those grants and those dollars go away and those facilities are up and running, they're gonna be looking for dollars, and they're gonna be coming back to the community for those types of, I'm just saying, this is one place that we could help in that area where it's, I mean, we can look to spend this money every which way, but I think that would be a logical place to
We really
put
don't have a
dollars.
detox center at all because of the lack of funding of detoxification. So it occurs at the jail or at a hospital, and then you go to Grand Junction to have a
we have one. I mean, we pay about
Well, you don't have a
45,000 bucks a year.
you don't have a 24-hour. Where?
It's at the location is actually at the hospital right next to it. We have a room there. And, I mean, we pay about $45,000 a year for it.
At the hospital?
It's in the,
The Health and Human
Thank you.
Services.
Health and Human Services, but it's not open 24/7.
So we can go
is it?
spend the night
Since
if we
when?
want?
since I've been here. It's been going since before I've been here.
Records in your case.
But neither here nor there at this point. I mean, I think the question really is, what we're looking for is, yeah, you could spend it, you could create it. I've heard arguments like John made for the elasticity. Hey, where would you do it best? I think Councilor Circus just made that. The other argument I've heard is, if you're gonna legalize it, tax it. I mean, and if you're gonna tax it, put the revenues towards decent purposes. I
Well,
mean, but that's,
I have a
those are,
I acknowledge that argument. I
Sure.
said that's one of the main ones, and the other main one to me is, what are we doing to enticing people to stay here?
and that's why we're looking to you all, it's like, we just get a little direction on
I have a question for you. Way back when we first started talking about this, you said you would need another police officer. Is that still correct?
No, I've had further discussions, and we have not seen any other community that's added staff, regulatory staff for it.
And are you anticipating education throughout our valley or our community relative to this as part of a town expense?
Well,
Not at this point.
that's really a decision for this body. When you read a lot of these questions, they'll have a purpose section in it.
Exactly.
And that's, I mean,
It's earmarked.
you haven't told staff that you want it for mental health facilities, detox facilities, education, but those are all within the realm. I guess what I'm trying to get you to get to that high level is, yes, we want to put a question on the ballot to tax this. No, we don't want to put that
I
question
want to put a
on.
ballot question on. I think we should tax it, and I think the 5% seems very, very reasonable. And then the other part of it is, I know none of you're very much to get putting this on the ballot. We have less than 24% registered voters participated in that thing, that survey, and you don't want to put it on the ballot. You might want to put a tax question, but you don't want to put the fundamental question, which people would like to have the right to vote on this issue.
People voted for us to make these decisions. And people also voted to approve recreational and medical marijuana on a statewide basis.
But not in this community.
Well,
You don't want to think, the point is, I hear where you're coming through from, Bob, but we all know that the issue around Base Village was very controversial. The issues around the plastic bags was controversial. We put it on the ballot. This is a controversial issue, and you don't want to put it on the ballot. I don't understand why? Why?
because a large number of people in the community think it's a waste of money and resources. Because it's all, they believe, they have told me, that it's already been determined more than once.
Well, a lot of people have talked to me too, and they would like to have the right to vote. So,
I
I'm
think,
just saying.
and you were not here, and I'm sorry for your memorial service that you had to attend, but Bill had a good point last week, that during the survey, people had to sign their names. And there were a lot of people that did not want to do the survey because they needed to sign their name, and maybe it was a little jilted, probably more on the plus side that wanted it. Even though the plus side won, there were probably more people didn't do the survey because they needed to sign their name.
But only 24% of the registered voters participated in the survey. That's not a majority. So the point is, that's my point. And when we take the right to vote away from our community based on a survey that was to be a directional survey,
There were a lot more things we did besides have a survey. We've spent more than 6 months talking to the various parties that we are concerned about and who had the most input, the most contact, the most interaction with our community. We spoke to Brian. We got the public safety perspective. We spoke with the marketing department. We've got the tourism and the group sales perspective. And none of these people felt that having a recreational marijuana shop in Snowmass would make any difference to their areas of concern and expertise.
and you
So
had
that's another reason why I don't think it needs a vote. We just didn't pull this out of the air.
Oh, I disagree, but my point is, you had tons of guests that participated and part-time homeowners that participated in that survey, and the results were opposite.
Right.
So that basically, they don't have a voice. That's what we're saying.
No, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that. I think Bob's point of how we listened to everybody for the last X amount of months, and now I don't know who Bob talked to or Bill talked to. I know I'm basing my decision on people that have talked to me. Okay, all right. Now, I have heard from some second homeowners who aren't happy with it, but I've heard more in favor of it than I have against it.
Well, the point is, the three of you are the ones that voted for it, so I guess it goes forward.
Well,
The
let's,
question-
I mean, let's come back to the question of the additional tax.
I'm all
because
about
that's-
excise tax.
Okay.
My God, we've got the school that needs money. One of the compelling arguments, or we've talked about, was, well, perhaps that will help offset the cost of what the taxes are for the school.
So, Clint or John, if the tax question was on the ballot, do we have the option, if it passes, to say we don't want to put it on?
Yeah,
don't have
I
to
wouldn't
impose it.
recommend that if the voters vote for it.
Oh, well, I'm just, okay,
Then you say, yeah, no.
okay, I
You
got
don't want to be
you.
in that position.
Okay.
Bill, where are you on it?
I mean, I don't think we're doing, we legalize marijuana for the locals necessarily. It's for our guests. I mean, they're coming to town. We want to provide a convenience for them.
For a family
Kind of
friendly.
like the 20% service charge at the lodges fee. I think another 5% on marijuana. I don't think it's going to swing people to go to town if it's a $5 decision on a $100 buy. And I think there's just a lot of different ways we can spend that money.
If we're gonna do it, I prefer 5% excise tax.
So, Travis, can you put that back up on the screen for a minute, please?
There was an additional 97,000 on the lower end, wasn't it? 97?
Doubled for.
Yeah,
with the
double
tax.
for,
Okay.
and that, if you had,
So, if in fact, instead of the low estimate, if we get the low estimate and we have an excise tax, we get 200 grand. And but if we don't have a low estimate, I mean, if we don't have an excise tax, we could easily be closer to the high estimate, and we'd be ahead of the game by 100 grand. So is it worth the risk of driving people away for the reward of an extra 100 grand as we build up volume? I mean, it's the current, it's the standard thing, right? Volume versus price.
well, $5, Bill's point is very well taken. $5 on $100 is nothing.
And I don't think our guests are gonna come here and say, oh, I hear it's cheaper in Aspen. I mean, I don't think they have that same philosophy.
It's a want and a need.
Yeah. I mean, I could go either way on it. I just don't see it as a major detraction.
Well, don't underestimate our local community, and particularly during the off-season, when, we don't have much going on, but the local community would, I suspect, would still, participate.
I would anticipate they do what they do now, they go down valley.
But the taxes are higher down valley.
Not necessarily, not in Glenwood Springs.
Carbondale, they are.
Carbondale,
Well,
they are.
no, I'm not saying, I'm saying Glenwood
Do
Springs.
you think the people are gonna drive to Glenwood to buy?
You go to the grocery store and you go to Walmart and you go to Target.
Well, some people do.
A lot of
Not
people, a lot of locals go to Walmart and Target. You're not,
I don't follow that, but it's just like, I don't follow that certain communities walk and don't drive. I don't get that, just like I don't believe in all that, but at any rate.
So, Marky, so again, I'm just looking at this. So Aspen is 21.3,
I know what it is.
right? Glenwood Springs is 20.2. I mean, that's 1%. If people are gonna drive from here to Glenwood Springs for 1%.
The question becomes, what is the price of the product?
Right,
Not the tax, the price of the product.
okay.
I don't have that comparison.
No, we don't have that comparison. Neither of us do. Neither of us do.
Well, to that same point, I mean, you can go to Silver Peak or you can go to
something
best
yesterday,
day,
whatever it's
and
called.
there's
Something
there's a
else.
price differential right there too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know.
I knew that was coming.
I mean, you guys clearly have more experience in this than
But
I do.
I think that's one of the challenges that we have, is because a lot of the people that are unfamiliar with marijuana are very resistant to it. There's a fear factor of the unknown.
I don't agree with that.
Oh, I do, for sure. I know people that have never been to a marijuana store, and they just, like, will turn a blind eye to it, and they just can't even wrap their head
Maybe
around
they
it
don't
at
want to
all.
learn about it.
That's fine.
They have a right not to want to.
Absolutely, but then they're making a judgment based on, not being naive. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, it's just the reality of what's going on.
We have, till September 9th to make a decision on this? No?
No.
What's the date?
That's to get, I think that date was in the staff report, and that's to get it submitted to the clerk. We need-
September 7th.
We need a decision from you guys far before that, so we can get the
I
language
say
up and going.
5%. I'm a 5%. If you really want to know, it'd be 10%, but I go 5.
Well-
I'm in the corner that I don't think that 5%'s I don't think it's gonna do anything except, drive people away and drive people into Aspen even more. That's how I feel about it. I don't think it's gonna make the community any more money.
Well, this is not a decision point tonight.
No, it's not.
It's a work
No, I'm
session.
I'm not making a decision. I'm just letting you know how I feel.
But, so for us, about half of you want to consider, put a tax question on the November ballot, and half of you don't, so, which is why there's normally 5. So we're at the same spot we were before, which is, you can understand where the confusion was. We didn't understand the direction before. So we'll stand by. But that's, if there is going to, it would need to be a proactive direction from the council to direct staff to say, make a motion to direct staff to prepare language.
Well, we can't make a motion tonight.
I understand that. But if there was 3, we could say, okay, we understand that's
Yeah,
the
the
direction.
direction.
But right now, it's tied. So for those of you that are proponents of a tax, I would suggest that at some point in a meeting, we get it on an agenda or have an item that says, we would like to take the proactive step of directing staff to prepare language that can go on the ballot.
We can do that at the next meeting. I would really like this to go to FAB, this whole analysis.
It's Wednesday.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not sure at your next meeting you're gonna have 5 either, honestly. I think
No,
your
we
next-
don't have 5 until August.
So I think that's,
August 6th is the first one with all 5.
because at the next meeting, I think it's gonna be the same 4, so my guess is you'd have the same discussion. And
We're not gonna put this on again next week.
No.
that's what I'm saying.
thought
That's what
Alyssa
I was saying,
might
the
be
next
back.
meeting's next week, and I wouldn't
Oh,
suggest
yeah.
that.
Okay.
But we can put it on for the 6th, and I think that's the next time there's a full council.
Well, what you,
But you're out on the 6th.
Driving
let me
home from
ask
Dad's
you,
house.
would it be possible on the 6th that we have the excise tax? We have 2 options. One, that the language, the ballot language, proposed ballot language with excise tax, and the other without? So you at least get some homework done on it.
There is no ballot language for without.
That's what
Well,
there
yeah,
could be.
Well, but I
Yes.
mean, at this point,
there could,
go ahead.
She's asking for, I think, a tax question and a legalization question.
That's what I think.
Right.
But so far,
I'm not in favor.
we're not in favor. A majority of the
She's
council-
asking you, I'm just clarifying her
favor of that.
question. Look at her, not me.
so let me ask you a next part of a question. If the community wanted this to be a ballot question, how many signatures are required for a petition?
How many electors do we have?
Well, I have an election,
I don't know.
1900.
1,900? That's 190.
Okay, thank you.
That's rough guesstimate.
Okay,
And if the tax question is not, They can't initiate a tax question, okay? They can initiate a referendum on a regulatory scheme. If they wanted to put a legalization question on, they could initiate that question.
So back to the tax, is there any way that we could see potential draft language at the August 6th meeting?
Certainly.
And then you'd have a 3-2 or 5-0 or whatever vote?
You could fully consider the ramifications of that language at that meeting.
Okay. Well, how about the rest of you? Does that seem reasonable for the 6th?
Yeah, I guess so.
We're talking about the tax
We're
question.
talking about a tax question.
That's what I'm talking about.
And the rate's 5%, we're preparing for. Thank you.
Is there anything else?
You don't need a motion to adjourn.
No, we don't have a, no.
No, we're not
No,
really even
we're
having
in
a
a
meeting.
work session.
We're done. As soon as the mayor says, we're done,
We're done.
we're done.